Jeff, I've got a glitch here. I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
So, I mean, goodness gracious. No, I don't want you to do that. Let me just try something here. Everything looks fine, and it's asking me to sign in, and it's strange because I'm already in.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't know what it's doing. I don't know what happened there.
Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellison, President at 1615. Today's webinar is the second in a three-part series for churches that send direct. Today, we'll be talking about creating a missionary nurture team. Most member care professionals now recognize that a large portion of the emotional and spiritual needs of missionaries can be met through carefully selected and specifically trained mature believers found in the missionary's own home church. This session will describe what a church-based missionary nurture team is, the criteria the leadership of the home church should use to select the members of the team, and the specific resources to ensure that the team members are equipped to provide pastoral level type care for the missionaries they send to the field. Today's subject matter expert is Jeff Jackson. He's a good friend of mine, and he serves as the Director of Church Relations and Missionary Care at Shepherd Staff Missions Facilitators. He is also the ministry's founder, and he travels extensively with Shepherd Staff today. Shepherd Staff exists to serve and empower local churches in their efforts to send and care for their own members who have been called to serve as missionaries in countries outside of the United States. In just a moment, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Jeff, but first a couple of details for you, our live web audience. Your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. You can listen through your computer speakers, or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind today, please type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. We will be addressing questions for the last 15 minutes of our time together. Nearly 50 people have registered for today's live webinar. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org in the next few weeks. Once again, that's 1615.org. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff now. Give me just a second to do that. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for taking time today to share with us. It's all yours.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. It's a blessing to be back, and hopefully there's a few of you that listened also last week, and if you're new today, I'm blessed that you're here and excited to talk about this subject. And I do want to give you a bit of a background to help you understand a little bit why I'm going at this from the angle that I am. I was sent directly from my home church back in the late 80s to the Central Philippines and received incredible care and nurture at a number of different levels from my home church. And so the things that I'm going to be sharing with you about a missionary nurture team and its role in the larger efforts of a local church to send and care for their missionaries are things that I've experienced personally firsthand, and I've seen the benefit of local churches taking this role seriously. And so with that, let me go ahead and move on to the next slide here. I want to go over the purpose of this webinar, and before I do that, let me sort of put it within the larger context of what we as a ministry have learned regarding local churches sending direct to the field. And the key concept is that when a local church wants to send their own people to the field direct, if there are three structures that church creates, it will make the sending and caring process many times better for the missionary and for the good of the sending church. And so last week we covered the idea of practical care teams, and that's basically a missionary constructed team where the person who's on his way to the field constructs a team of people that care for sort of the nuts and bolts practical things that they're going to need out on the field. And there's a lot of benefit for the missionary, for the church, for the members of the team when that happens. This structure that we're going to look at today is, and I want to emphasize this, and I'll do it more than once, is this is a structure within the church that the church leadership actually constructs. And so we're going to walk through what that looks like from a number of different angles, and hopefully it'll be clear by the time we're done. So the purpose of this webinar today is I want to describe and define what a church leadership constructed missionary nurture team is. I want to lay out a simple plan for the leadership structure of the team and the criteria that when the church leadership is constructing the team, what kind of people they're looking for, and also we'll take a look at what kind of people they're not looking for to be part of this team. And then at the end, I want to provide some specific resources that once you've constructed the missionary nurture team, they can be specifically trained and equipped to do nurture for missionaries. So let me begin by answering the question, what is a missionary nurture team? Well, as far as the missionary care component, it's the second component of a two-tiered missionary care ministry within the home church of a missionary. Specifically, a missionary nurture team is a small group of people selected by the home church leadership of a missionary that have been screened and equipped to provide pastoral type care for missionaries. And I think what's important to point out here is that this group of people, this missionary nurture team, they're providing care at a pastoral type level for missionaries. So not everybody in the congregation is capable or mature enough or has the gifts to provide that level of care for missionaries who are experiencing, unique challenges and unique stresses by living cross-culturally in countries outside of the United States. So what this team is doing, in a sense, is it's a team that's going to provide that pastoral type care for the missionaries. And one of the benefits of that, which I'll cover a little bit later too, is that then the actual pastoral staff of the church knows that pastoral type care is being given to their missionaries with people that are trained on how to minister to the unique challenges that missionaries face. So what I'd like to do next is talk about the leadership of the missionary nurture team. So point number one is that the existing church leadership, either the senior pastor or the pastoral staff, designates either a pastoral staff member or a clear elder type level person in the church to create, lead, and oversee the missionary nurture team. In other words, the leadership of the church imparts the opportunity to another leader within the church to create this team. Now, who should that be? Well, different members of the leadership of churches have different interests in missions. And so you want to find somebody on your staff or in a key leadership role that is already aware of what God's doing around the world, that has a heart for what God's doing around the world. And it's sort of a much easier on-ramp for somebody that's got a heart for global missions and a heart for missionaries to construct the team. So once that leader is designated, the guy who's going to create, lead, and oversee the nurture team, then point number two, the team leader initiates and then actually oversees the selection process. And once that's moving forward, he's going to share the vision and the selection criteria with other church leaders and invite them to recommend church members that they believe could serve in this important ministry. Now let me make that a little simpler. The basic idea is that in missions endeavors, the more people that a local church has engaged with what God's doing around the world, especially through their missionaries, the healthier that church is going to be and the healthier the missionary is going to be. So if you've got a group of people that are serving on the practical care team of a missionary that the missionary himself has constructed, and now you've got a separate group of people that are part of the missionary nurture team, you've got a large group of people that have a hands-on personal interest in what God's doing around the world. And so in constructing the team, the leader that's actually going to build the team, he should share the vision and the selection criteria with other church leaders. For example, he would go to maybe the director of the children's ministry or the leader of the home fellowships, the men's ministry leader, the women's ministry leader. And this person should go to them and say, hey, we're creating this new ministry to care for our missionaries. This is kind of what the vision is. This is kind of the person we're looking for. Do you have somebody that serves within your ministry that you oversee? Do you have somebody that might fit this bill? And what you want to do is kind of impart the vision and the criteria to other church leaders and then ask them to recommend church members that they believe could serve in this important ministry. And those church leaders that are overseeing existing ministries and the people that do them, they should have a personal awareness of people that would fit this bill. And so again, what you're doing is you're bringing other members of the church into sort of ownership of this ministry that you're getting off the ground. And even though they themselves may not serve as part of the missionary nurture team, if they've selected people that they think would be able to be part of it, it blesses the person who's going to be part of the team and certainly blesses the leader and can kind of give you a window even into that leader's capacity for spotting other servants and the ability to raise people up. So that's the next point. Now, the missionary team leader then selects the team members, is going to set up the training for the team members, and is going to assign the missionary team, nurture team members to missionaries, and then provide ongoing oversight. And so we'll get a little bit more into this a little later, but one of the key points from this point is that we want the missionary nurture team, once he's constructed the team, there are natural connections for members of the team with certain kinds of missionaries or certain categories of missionaries that are serving out there. And so the missionary nurture team leader is going to ensure that the right member of the team is connected to the right missionary. That's very important. So that's kind of the leadership structure from the bigger picture. Now, let's go on to the selection criteria. And what we're looking for, what the missionary nurture team leader is looking for, I want to go over these three areas, and these have to do with the character of potential missionary nurture team members. And I should say, and give credit where credit is due here, a lot of what I'm going to lay out here over the next three slides is stuff that I've learned from Larry May Gardner. She is she's one of the, you might say, the heavyweights in the member care realm and world. Some of you may have heard of her. She's got field experience. She's written much on member care. And so a large portion of what I'm going to share with you in these next couple slides comes from her with sort of my modifications based on my experience in setting up these teams in various churches. So when we're looking for what kind of person should be part of the missionary nurture team, on the character quality side of it, we want to look for somebody who's spiritually mature, obviously. Okay, and what we mean by that is somebody who's emotionally healthy and stable, somebody who has integrity, somebody who is one of those people that's Bible truth saturated, because there's a learning curve involved in learning how to minister to missionaries and really encourage them at a pastoral type level. This person, regardless of their age, needs to be a lifelong learner. In other words, they've got to be willing to say, you know what, I don't really understand the stresses missionaries are under, but I'm willing to learn so that I can help and listen and speak into their lives. And it should be somebody who's respected and trusted by other mature believers. And so I think I mentioned this in last week's seminar, but I want to emphasize it for sure here, and I'll emphasize it more than once as we go through these qualities. It really does matter what other believers think about this potential missionary nurture team member. In other words, other people that know them and love them, serve alongside them, what do they say about this person? How would they describe them? Would they describe them as spiritually mature? So spiritual maturity is one angle. The next angle is basic personality traits. You know, you're looking for somebody who has warmth, somebody who is gentle, somebody who is naturally empathetic, and somebody who is genuine. You know, God uses all kinds of people, and people have all kinds of personality traits. Because of the unique challenges and stresses that missionaries are under, there's a great need for somebody that they're going to open up to and share their hearts with. There's a great need for that person in order to have the right to speak into their lives, that the person be somebody who has a warm personality, who's gentle, who's empathetic, and who's genuine. And finally, there are relational traits. And this is actually one of those areas where when you're trying to find the team members and you're sort of laying out for them a specific person, what the vision is, and kind of the purpose and what the criteria is to be part of it, you can pick up on their relational traits even as you discuss this potential ministry with them. And so one of the important relational traits, maybe the most crucial relational trait, is they got to be a good listener. If they're somebody who they only listen long enough to make the point that they want to make, if they interrupt constantly, if they don't give you the opportunity to finish a complete thought or a complete sentence, they're not good listeners as you describe the ministry to them. They're probably not a good fit to be in a missionary nurture team, because the ability to listen, and especially interactive listening, which would be part of the training, is absolutely crucial. So are they a good listener? Do they have a clear interest in people? You know, it's interesting, having been out on the field and having visited a lot of different missionaries in many countries around the world, it's amazing how many church leaders or leaders of short-term ministry teams go to countries and they're more enamored with the beauty of the country. In other words, the mountains, the rice terraces, the beautiful rivers, the temples, whatever. And after a few days, you recognize, you know what? They're more enthralled with the physical things in this country than the people that they're actually here to do ministry to. So what we want to do, a missionary nurture provider needs to be somebody who has a clear interest in people. Now, what those people are doing is important, but this person that we want to have in this role, they got to be people that love people. Also, they need to be people that desire to see others grow. They long to see others grow. And they need also to have an appropriate desire to help others grow. Okay, so there's a bit of a nuance between those two things that I want to lay out for you. Number one, they should be the type of person that loves to see others grow, but they should not have an inappropriate desire to help others grow. In other words, and I'll get to this sort of on the negative characteristics in a few minutes, their desire to help others grow, to be part of somebody else's spiritual maturity, is appropriate to the relationship that they have with them. They don't go too deep too soon because the relationship isn't at that level yet. They're sensitive to those kind of things. And also, relationally, they should be people that are already sought out by others for emotional, practical, and spiritual guidance. That's also a crucial one. So when you're thinking through and you're sort of informing the other church leaders of who you're looking for, the type of person you're looking for to be part of the missionary nurture team, and the character qualities realm, you want spiritual maturity, personality traits, relational traits, and a lot of times the church leaders, those that oversee different ministries and people within the church, they'll be able to sort of peg who those people are just by describing the things on this list. So that's character qualities. Next, there needs to be, in a sense, a gift validation component. And the basic idea behind this is that, somebody should have gifts that are already on display to other people. So point number one, the gifts and abilities that are essential for being an effective missionary nurturer should already be on display in the potential missionary nurture team member's life. It's interesting, I'm reminded of Paul's sort of church planning method that's revealed in the book of Acts, where he would go in and he would preach the gospel, and a church would be birthed in a certain city. And he didn't immediately appoint elders in that city. He went on, he traveled to other cities, and then he went back through those cities after a period of time and then appointed elders in those cities. In a sense, what he was doing was he was letting those that have the gifts, they would begin to naturally, by the giftedness God had given them, they'd sort of rise to the surface. And then as he came through at a later time, all he was doing was recognizing the giftedness that was already there. It's kind of like I've been in churches where they appoint elders, and the idea isn't, hey, you become an elder on the day we ordain you and we pray for you. The ordination is just a recognition of a role that you're already serving in. And so these gifts should already be on display in the potential missionary nurture team member's life. Also, I covered this earlier, emphasizing this again, asking impartial observers about this person's giftedness is crucial. And I know this is sort of, awkward for some people, but again, a person in church leadership, an overseer of various ministries, ought to be able to go and ask the people that serve under his leadership, hey, what do you, give me a gift description of somebody else that you serve alongside. Joe over here, what do you think his gifts are based on your observation of him? And there should be a lot of weight put into what impartial observers describe a person's giftedness to be. Point number three, these impartial observers that I'm asking about should be current or former ministry leaders, maybe fellow church members that they've served alongside, and even the people that they're serving alongside or that they have served directly themselves. Okay, so that's kind of, find a good cross-section, you might say, of people who can give you a real window into whether this person has the gifts that would make them a good member of the missionary nurture team. And finally, if the observer demonstrates surprise, this is kind of a no-brainer. If the observer demonstrates surprise at the person's desire to serve in a highly relational role, beware. And what I mean by that is, if in this process of trying to select the team members and you're sort of asking somebody about somebody else's giftedness, if the person you're asking for their input on, if they say, oh, that person serving in that role, and if they seem sort of surprised, like, wow, that's not something I could envision them doing. It's not something that I've seen them already do. It's not something that's a part of their life already, then, basically beware. Because again, what we're looking for is people that already navigate in these areas. So that is gift validation, and the next category is motivation. And this is important too. When you share the ministry of the missionary nurture team with somebody or with the leader who's going to help you recruit the members of the team, when you inform the person about the ministry, as many questions as possible are answered, and the person is challenged to pray about serving in this capacity. In other words, you found somebody that's been recommended by other church leaders. Now you're approaching them and you're informing them about the ministry. You're giving them the vision. You're answering their questions. You've asked them to pray about serving in this capacity. How do they respond? Next point, do they spend at least a few days praying about it? If they immediately say, oh yeah, I'd love to do that, count me in, you kind of, well, okay, really, this is a serious area, I want you to give it a few days to think about it and to pray about it and ask yourself practical questions. Do I have the time to do this? Do I have the time to equip myself to understanding what missionaries experience, the things that they go through? Do I have the flexibility that I'm going to need to deal with whatever may come up in the life of a missionary? And if there's an area that I'm unfamiliar with, I'm ready again to continually to learn. So do they spend at least a few days praying about it before they respond? And then finally, do they express their acceptance in a humble way that demonstrates they see it as a calling from Him and a privilege to serve missionaries? And this one is crucial. What you're looking for here is somebody that sort of, when you share this with them, they're sort of like amazed. Sort of like in 1 John, where John's talking about how amazing it is that God would love us, how out of this world God's love is for us, that He would consider us and count us to be His children. And so, you sort of are looking for that humble awe factor. When you tell them, hey, I'd like to challenge you to be part of this team. I've gotten some good feedback from your ministry overseer. Other people think that you might be a good fit for this. I want to share this with you and ask you to pray about it. And then you answer all their questions. And if they're sort of like, they're like, wow, that's amazing that you consider me in this role. That's what you're looking for, that kind of humility. And then, again, as they pray about it, and perhaps they then respond, and they come and tell you, that they want to do it. You want to hear people that recognize and put it into context of, man, this is a calling from God. This is a high calling and a privilege to serve, missionaries. And the fact that God would give me the privilege, that you would recognize my capacity for doing this, I'm amazed at that. And I'm going to take this seriously as a stewardship, as a gift from God. And just as a side note, it sort of reminds me, I served in the Army many years ago. And when I was stationed in Massachusetts at Fort Devens, there was a USO branch in the little city that was outside of the base. And I remember, they would do stuff for the soldiers. We were far away from our homes, far away from our families. We're going through the military training. And, they would do Thanksgiving dinners for us. They would have these different things. And there was always the attitude among those USO members. A lot of them were older, senior citizen women. Their attitude was always, it's a privilege for us to be able to do this for you and to serve you. And that's the kind of attitude that we're looking for, where, hey, the motivation to be on this team, it needs to be viewed as, man, this is a calling from God, it's a stewardship from God, and I'm going to do this in a way that brings Him all the glory He deserves, and I'm going to serve these missionaries so that they're going to be as healthy as possible, as nurtured as possible to do the ministry that God's called them to. So motivation is very important. So those are like the three overarching guidelines for missionary nurture team selection criteria. And what I'd like to do now is talk about, the wrong sort of motivations. And basically what this is sort of a list of the kind of people you really don't want to be on the team. And you may not discover these things. It may be somebody who's been recommended by their leader, and you've gotten you've challenged them, to pray about being a part of the team or whatever, and you may not pick these things up until a little bit further downstream, but here's some unhealthy motivations to be part of a missionary nurture team, okay? Obviously, if they have an observable need to be needed, that's not somebody that is going to be capable of really speaking into a missionary's life. So, we all know people that have an observable need to be needed. It's like their ego needs to be stroked at a certain level. Their identity is wrapped up in being needed by others. So if somebody's got an observable need to be needed, that's probably not a good candidate, at least at this point in their walk, to be part of the missionary nurture team. Next, you don't want somebody who has their own needs met through nurturing the process of nurturing others, okay? So in other words, it's kind of like the point that I just made, but it's sort of a codependency sort of mindset that you really don't want there. In other words, You don't want people who, as they are nurturing somebody else, and they're trying to set up mechanisms and stuff to nurture somebody else, it's actually nurturing them, and it's feeding them in a way that if they weren't doing that, they would be left unhealthy, or they wouldn't be progressing or maturing, okay? So you don't want somebody that's doing it from that angle. Number three, somebody with an unnatural desire to have intimate knowledge of others, somebody who has no respect for personal boundaries, somebody that can't keep a trust. You don't want that kind of a person to be in this role, okay? Because it really is a stewardship, and trust is a crucial factor. So, you know, there are people that just love to have inside information and intimate knowledge of other people, and usually those kind of people don't have respect for boundaries of other people. Next point is viewing information in a sense as a source of power or influence that feeds a desire to control others. So again, you don't want the kind of person that when they have inside information, or they have information, you know, that other people don't have, they use that in a sense as a tool or a source of power to try to influence other people or to gain control over people. Because as you know, as we all know, information is power. Knowledge is power. And next, helping others to avoid their own problems. In other words, you don't want somebody who has quite a bit of their own problems, and basically what they're doing is they're helping others so they don't have to come face to face with their own problems. And finally, an imbalance in helping others versus keeping themselves healthy. Okay, so again, you want that person that's, you know, emotionally balanced. They know how to walk the line between giving out selflessly and keeping themselves healthy. And this is a really important one because missionaries, generally speaking, we would categorize as workaholics. And missionaries themselves, a lot of times, are way out of balance with putting out, serving, and not actually taking care of the servant, not taking Sabbath days, rest days, not taking time off, constantly feeling the strain of like I've got to produce because people are supporting me. And a lot of that is part of the training that the missionary nurture team should receive. You want the team trained in understanding that truth about missionaries. So you don't want somebody on the nurture team that is not balanced in helping others versus keeping themselves healthy. Now, let me sort of start to stitch this all together for you. It may sound a little disjointed at this point, but let me kind of point out a few things and kind of stitch it all together, and then I want to talk about some of the components of training and some resources to help you do this. So a couple of things that are important. The missionary nurture team size is variable, but ideally the team should be between, say, 8 and a dozen people. It can be larger than that, but I've found that the smaller the team, in a sense, the more effective it is. But it needs to be, ideally it would be more than just 4 or 5 people. It would be 6, 8, 10, up to 12 people. So you want to keep the team fairly small, easily manageable for the missionary nurture team leader. And the other thing is that you want to try, if at all possible, to recruit team members that are within the different spectrums of categories that missionaries are in. In other words, if you've got missionaries either in your church, from your church all on the field, or in the chute ready to go, and they're one of them is a single woman who's never been married, you should pray for for the Lord to provide a single woman who's never been married to be part of the missionary nurture team. You should definitely have married couples. If you have single guys that are out there, you want to have ideally a representation of the kind of category of people that are serving out on the field. And there are things obviously to a single man and a single woman. There's unique stresses that they have in addition to the stresses they have by being a cross-cultural ministry person. Being single on the mission field is a different experience than being married on the mission field. Having children, couples or families that that have children and they're raising their kids out on the field, it's helpful to have some team members that have children and have raised children. There's a lot of crossover that can be found there. So as far as like the makeup of the team, maximum say 8 to a dozen people, and then try to have a good piece of the whole spectrum. Single guys, single gals, married couples, and couples with children. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of the training, and there's resources which I'm going to cover here in just a minute. But basically, what needs to happen is most Americans don't understand the unique challenges, obviously, of living overseas and of living in a culture that's radically different from your own. And so part of their training in helping them to understand why missionaries are stressed out, what produces the stress, and how to speak into their lives, part of that is stuff that can be learned by training, by reading, by talking to other missionaries. And so you want to cover areas, and I know this kind of sounds crazy, but part of the training for the missionary nurture team needs to be basically like a theology of suffering, where all the team members understand that there's a cost and there's a risk to being a missionary in another country, that suffering and sometimes even death may be a part of God's plan, and that the people you're going to minister to and encourage, they're going to need somebody that can speak into their lives with that knowledge, with that reality, and can anchor what they're experiencing into a theology of suffering, a theology of risk, some organizations call it. Also, it's very crucial for them to understand the idea that the reason those missionaries are out there is because the God of the Bible is a missionary God. So in a sense, a theology of missions is crucial too. And then probably the key component in training the missionary nurture team is helping them to understand the uniqueness of American culture, which is what your missionaries have grown up with, and how American culture, a person grown up in American culture, when they go into a culture that's radically different, a culture that's not as individualistic, a culture that doesn't value independence but values dependence, when they go into a culture that is an honor and shame-based culture rather than a guilt and innocence-based culture, when everything that makes us feel comfortable with ourselves here in America as products of our culture, when those sources are disconnected from Americans, we tend to respond in certain ways. And so the missionary nurture team, having an understanding of American culture, of cross-cultural stresses and the challenges of ministering cross-culturally, and then having biblical-based responses to that, so that they can speak into their lives and encourage the missionary, that's a crucial part of the training too. And so with that in mind, let me go over some resources that if you want to, in a sense, if you want to equip people to be missionary nurturers, here's some resources that can help you. There are 4 key websites run by ministries that I highly recommend, and by spending time on any of these websites or any of their products or any of the resources they produce or their training, it's going to be a monumental step forward. So number 1 is a ministry called Heartstream Resources. They're in Pennsylvania. They have some great resources on their website, but also they do really good training for people that want to minister to missionaries. They also have a debriefing ministry and a ministry to missionaries that have burned out or are in the midst of massive discouragement. Next, I'm sure most of you are probably already familiar with MTI, so MTI.org, and they actually put on a training for how to debrief missionaries, and that's a component of missionary nurture, but from the emotional sort of spiritual health angle, they do a training a couple times a year called CODAR, and it's a 1-week training where they really give you an insight into stresses missionaries are under, how to help them process their experience, and they even have a specialized one for third culture kids or missionary kids. Next is Barnabas.org. Barnabas International is a great ministry. They put on a yearly conference, the PTM conference, called Pastor to Missionaries, and it's basically a missionary care conference. Actually, it just took place a couple of weeks ago. And at this conference, they basically teach people who want to learn how to love on missionaries and encourage them and speak into their lives and nurture them. This is a great resource. And they actually have a book that I'm going to recommend here in a moment. And finally, there's another organization that's specifically geared towards missionary care, Care Connection, and you've got the website there on your resource page. Now, those are all ministries where you can go and take part in their training, or you can access resources. There are other ministries that will actually come to your church and train your missionaries, your missionary nurture team, on how to minister to missionaries. Obviously, that's one of the things that we do as a ministry for the churches we work with, and even the churches we don't. We have about a 5-hour missionary nurture providing seminar, and normally I'm the one that goes out and I do it in 3 sessions. And by the end of this workshop, those that attend, the missionary nurture guys that attend, they have a really good handle on how to speak into a missionary's life. Parakletos, Dave Lewis and his wife do incredible ministry, and will do the same thing at the local church level in your churches. We highly recommend Parakletos, and we're of the same mind and of the same heart. They also do re-entry debriefing ministry at their location there, but they're mobile for their missionary nurture training in the same way that Shepherd staff is. And then finally, I want to give you some books here. The first book is Tender Care, and this is actually published by Barnabas International. And so you've got to go, if you go to barnabas.org, you can purchase the book from their website. When we do our training, our missionary nurture providing training, I usually distribute at least a couple of the Tender Care books to the people that are there and recommend that people get them and read them. And what's really great about that book is they use sort of an analogy all through the book of a deep sea diver. And they actually, the name of the book is based on the idea of a deep sea diver who's working down under the water as somebody who's tending to them from the surface. And they use all these cool little analogies to express and explain the different needs that missionaries have that are like a deep sea diver, and the role the tender plays up on the surface. There's another great book called Walk With Me by Elizabeth Marie. I think you can pick that up on Amazon. Probably, I think it's in Kindle form. And then there's a probably, you know, probably in a sense, the guru of member care in a lot of ways is a guy named Kelly O'Donnell and his wife Michelle, and they have sort of a compilation called Doing Member Care Well, and they're professionals, but they write in ways that makes it really simple and understandable for a person who's not trained professionally to get a grip on what missionaries are experiencing and how to speak into their lives. And finally, a couple of online resources. I can't say enough about missionarycare.com. Almost any issue that your missionary is dealing with, there's a little pamphlet or something to read on the missionarycare.com website. The folks that produce this stuff are amazing. They have amazing insight. And even so far as, you know, it may sound a little crazy, but one of the stress points for missionaries is living in cultures where what we would consider bribes are a normal part of life. And whether you should take a bribe, what is a bribe, how do you define a bribe, how do you contrast that with a gift, there's even resources to kind of look at those kind of issues, because that's part of missionary care. It can be a source of stress to know whether you should pay a bribe or not, and with all the other stresses you've got going on, having an understanding of that can be very helpful. And then finally, there's a really good blog, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, called alifeoverseas.com, and it's basically a blog that's contributed to by dozens of missionaries that are actually either on the field or have recently returned, and they write on different angles. And if you just spend a couple of weeks reading the blog posts on A Life Overseas, you'll have a pretty good window into what missionaries are experiencing and how to understand and how to speak into their lives. So I want to wrap this up now and basically say that in the three-part structure that we recommend for local churches, you've got the practical care team that is constructed by the missionary, and what I just covered is the missionary nurture team. The key thing about this is constructed by the leadership of the church, and it's people that can minister at a pastoral type level to missionaries. And one last thought, some churches actually send their missionary nurture team members to do on-site visits of their missionaries. Not to be necessarily a part of a short-term team, but basically the church says, hey, we know you need to be ministered to in your context. We want to send one of your missionary nurture team members to go and visit you, and then the missionary nurture team member, who's prepared, who's equipped, can actually pay an on-site visit and speak into the missionaries' lives while they're on the field. So with that, I want to shut this thing down and open it up to questions and answers. So Matt, go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Again, great information, very inspiring and also very instructive. Remind folks that you can ask questions in the Q&A GoToWebinar task panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I've got a couple I'm going to start with here, Jeff. How important is it for a missionary nurture team candidate to have experienced the mission field firsthand? I'm assuming they're asking about a short-term trip.
You know, I think a short-term trip is helpful. I think being out of your element in a context that's very unfamiliar to is helpful, but I don't think it's absolutely essential. And in fact, it's kind of like some of the people that have wanted to be part of missionary nurture teams, it's almost like they feel like, hey, I've been on a short-term trip, so I know what the missionary is experiencing, and they're not as teachable. It's kind of like, knowing a little karate is more dangerous than knowing none, because you'll act like you know karate and you really don't. So sometimes the teachability factor, which is so crucial in ministering to missionaries, being willing to learn, sometimes a short-term trip and cross-cultural experience on a short-term team will actually sort of numb the person to being as good a learner as they need to be.
Very interesting answer there. So it might be helpful, depends on the person and maybe the level of experience overseas.
Yes. But not essential. Not essential.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Someone asks about how the missionary nurture team and the practical care team relate to one another.
That's a good question. There's because the practical care team, you have, as your practical care team, you have somebody on the team. I mean, everybody cares about a missionary that's on the team, but you have that person who's an encourager on the practical care team. So there's going to be some overlap there, but in a sense, the encourager, although an encourager has to be a good listener, an encourager is more of an outflow to bless and encourage the missionary, whereas the missionary nurture team members, they're not only encouragers, but they're listeners, and in a sense, don't misunderstand what I'm saying, they're willing to give counsel. They're willing to suggest strongly that somebody do this or somebody not do that. So, thinking about that question, I didn't make this clear, so let me make it clear now. Every missionary should create their own practical care team. So if you've got 5 missionaries out from your church, there should be 5 practical care teams. But the missionary nurture team, there's only one team for all the missionaries that are out from that church. And so there's going to be overlap, because the missionary nurture team and the practical care team, they all care about missionaries, but really they're in different roles. And a lot of what the missionary nurture team members do is sort of personal, private. It's sort of in that realm of privacy, and there's a need to have pretty well-defined boundaries. And so there may be a desire on the part of the practical care team members to know what the missionary nurture team members are thinking about the missionaries, but the missionary nurture team member is doing that pastoral type care level ministry. You got to kind of keep close to your chest what you're learning about the missionary, what they're experiencing, and so forth. So I hope that answers your question. There's no intentional connection that needs to be made, but there'll be a natural bridge. But it needs to be done carefully, especially from the nurture team angle.
Jeff, I'm really glad you clarified that, because I was even envisioning, wow, 8 to 12 individuals for every, missionary unit on the field or missionary family, and that really is helpful. So again, I just want to clarify, you spelled it out well, but practical care teams, that missionary raises up a care team himself or herself or as a family. The nurture team is more church-based. It's a group of 8 to 12 that then provide nurture to all of the church's missionaries.
Yes, absolutely. And if I would have thought about it, obviously I would have had that as one of the slides and made that clearer.
Yeah,
But
that's
I'm glad
helpful.
that question came up.
Yeah, me too. Someone mentions here the theology of suffering. Any resources you can recommend?
If you just Google a theology of suffering, you'll a bunch of stuff will come up. If you go to New Tribes, ntm.org, they have what they call the theology of risk. That's what they call their theology of suffering. There's a theology of risk. There's a really, God, the name's escaping me right now, but in our training, in our missionary nurture training, I have a PDF that I give out to people on a theology of suffering. But there's, just on reading wise, if you just want to bone up on the idea of a theology of suffering, Tim Keller's got a great book on suffering and its role in God's bigger plan and picture. So there's a lot available out there on the theology of suffering, and because of the way the world is now, all of us are going to have to develop or have a more well-developed theology of suffering the way the world's going. But if you don't have that, it's crucial. Also, if you email me or email Shepherd staff, we have resources that we can send you to, even including our policy on crisis management, which we'll talk about next week. We have a theology of suffering that's part of that too.
So this person wants to remain anonymous.
Okay.
They're saying that the church leaders really aren't on board with missions in general, and so it's hard to imagine that they're going to give the latitude to start these teams of nurture and care. What do I do? How do I get buy-in or affirmation from my church leaders?
Yeah, and I mean I understand that's a challenge. There are churches out there that have missionaries, their own members, that are out on the field, but just don't see the value in caring for them, and they don't understand the stresses they're under. And so, having been a pastor, a church planner, having been in leadership at a couple different churches over the years, even if our church leadership wasn't interested in a certain area, every church leader cares about people. And I think if your approach is not to tell the church leaders what they need to do, but to share with them, hey, God's given me a real heart to love on our missionaries, and I want to learn how to minister to and encourage our missionaries. And I just want to give you a heads up that I'm doing that personally, and I'm taking the initiative to contact them or whatever. And I'd like to actually gather up a few people and begin praying with them, and we want to learn how to understand and minister to our missionaries. It's the kind of thing that I think, and I'm going to be really frank here, it's the kind of thing that if it starts at the grassroots level, even if church leaders won't buy into the vision before there's anything there, if the members of the church are already doing something and there's already some measurable, visible impact from what they're doing, and then they find out about what's going on, seldom will those people squelch people from doing that kind of stuff. So you don't need to do a big to-do. It's not stuff that you're going to announce from the pulpit. It's just talking to the church staff and saying, hey, I think God's really put on my heart we need to share our love with our missionaries better, and I want to learn how to do that myself and see if that's something that maybe God wants to do through more members of our body.
That's great. Someone asks here about the visitation to the field, what Jeff, you and I have often called Epaphroditus trips.
Yes.
Book of Philippians, he is sent out. The whole church can't, go on the trip, and so they send Epaphroditus to minister to Paul in prison with some type of a love gift or resources. And It says that he completed what was lacking in their love. And at first it sounds like a knock against the church in Philippi, but it's not. He just delivered in person. He delivered
Yes.
the love of the church in Philippi was delivered in person through Epaphroditus. Should this be a regular part of an MNT or just when there's crisis?
No, I think it should absolutely be a regular part. In fact, if the church has the resources, or maybe the individual has the resources, a once a year visit on the field from somebody back at your home church that is there to nurture you and encourage you, that's absolutely valuable. I mean, if I could set it up the way I wanted, if I could get churches to commit at the level that I'd like to see them do that, every missionary on the field would receive a nurture care visit at least once a year.
Mm.
And just that, and normally what will happen is when a nurture team provider is sent to the field, it's almost always going to be somebody there's a previous relationship with, where that nurturer has already been Skyping with them, communicating with them, praying for them. There's already some connection there and a level of trust and respect for the nurture provider's ability to nurture. And so an on-field visit is the natural outflow of that, and to set aside resources to do that, because there's great value in people being ministered to when they come off the field. Certainly, in most cases, the missionary nurture team members' largest role is going to be when the missionaries are back here on furlough or they've come off the field, and ongoing, in a sense, through Skype. But there's nothing like having somebody drop into your world in the midst of your day-to-day life in the mission field that is sensitive to what you're going through and can enter in and sort of speak into your lives, let you bear your heart with them, pray for you, encourage you. There's just nothing like that. And as valuable as conferences are and retreats are, that personal visit by a missionary care trained person can make a huge difference in the life of a missionary.
Yeah, I refer to that passage in Philippians, and Paul calls him a fellow worker, brother, and a fellow soldier. And then he says, honor such men. And, it just elevates the importance of those field visits as high as they can be elevated. It is just such a crucial role.
Yeah, and Matt, let me tighten that up a little bit too with Stephanus. In 1 Corinthians 16, I use this quite regularly. In 1 Corinthians 16, verse 17, Paul says, I rejoice at the coming of Stephanus and Fortunatus and Achaicus, because they have made up for your absence. And then listen to what he says. He says, for they refreshed my spirit, as well as yours. And so Paul is saying, hey, Stephanus, Fortunatus, Achaicus, they came and visited me on your behalf, and they refreshed my spirit in the same way that they refreshed yours. So they're people that had the gift of refreshment of other people. And here's the interesting thing, Matt, and I love to throw this out there. The next point he makes is give recognition to such men.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I emphasize, listen, people that provide missionary nurture in local churches, they need to be acknowledged within the church for what they do, how crucial it is what they do. There should be some notoriety, in a sense, given to them so that other members of the church know, oh, that guy's loving on our missionaries in a unique way. There's some respect deserved and should be given to that person.
Yeah, the language is very similar in that Corinthians passage too, Jeff, that made up for your absence. Again, initially it seems like a slight, or a criticism, but it's not. The idea is the whole church can't come and visit. And so they deliver the gift of presence. I often talk about this when I'm talking about missionary visitation is, we like to bring presence, Presents, but the biggest gift you can give to the missionary on the front line is presence, Presence. And,
absolutely.
They vicariously bring the love of the whole church. It is so crucial for longevity of missionaries on field.
And the church needs to recognize people that do that on their behalf. They're the people that they've sent out. So
here we are preaching, Jeff. Who knew
I know.
in the webinar this way? Well, listen, Jeff. Again, thank you. One more thing. Cheryl Weaver asks about PowerPoints and printed copies from last week. Cheryl, we'll make sure you get those. I know the webinar is posted. I don't believe the actual PowerPoints have been posted yet, but we will review last week's and make sure everyone who requested those gets those. And then if anyone wants this presentation again, the actual PowerPoint presentation, we can make that available to you. The webinar itself will be available here in the next week or two online, but if you want the actual slides, please make that known in the question and answer panel, and we will send it off to you. Want to just take a few moments here before we close and remind everybody that the third installment in this three-part series is next week. And I want to mention that I think this is absolutely critical today. I mean, it's always been important, but as you mentioned, Jeff, the dangers associated with doing radical gospel ministry around the world are growing. They're not decreasing. And so these situations are going to be happening, I think, with a greater frequency. And first, I hope churches have that theology of suffering that counts it an honor to send their sons and daughters to the ends of the earth into the dangerous places. But they also need to know how to handle them if something should go, if that happens to be God's will for the situation, that they know how to handle those crises that happen on the field. So next week is building a missionary crisis management team. You do need to register for this webinar individually, even if you've registered for this one today. You can do that at 1615.org and click the events button on the top of the page. And then we have another webinar coming up on November 11th, and I think it is very important. There are 1 billion Buddhist people in the world, and how do we reach them? How do we build those bridges of gospel communication with them? This is going to take place once again on November 11th. You can register for this as well at 1615.org. I'm seeing a few more requests for your PowerPoint, Jeff. We'll make sure we get those out.
Great.
I'm going to leave Jeff's slide up here. Has the website for Shepherd Staff. Jeff, is there a link to your email on that website as well?
There should be a link to it, but if you want, I can give it to everybody right now. My email is J as in Jeff, T as in Tom, J as in Jeff, A as in Alpha, X as in X-ray, U as in uniform, N as in Nancy. So it's jtjaxun@gmail.com.
Great. So if you have any further questions for Jeff directly, I'm sure he'd be happy to address those. There should also be a link off of the Shepherd Staff website, which is listed right there. Once again, I will leave that open right now so people can write that down. So thank you so much, Jeff, again, for sharing your wisdom, your experience with the larger body of Christ. I want to thank everyone who attended today. We hope this certainly encouraged you and blessed you. And we hope you understand even more just how important member care is, or missionary care as some call it. And we hope you've been instructed to do it with excellence and you have some new ideas. Thank you again, Jeff, for sharing. Thank you for the live audience once more. I'm Matthew Ellison for 1615. Thank you so much for being here today.